Cinephile ASMR, and today we are ranking all of the Spider-Man films from worst to best. I put up a poll a few days ago asking if you guys would want me to rank the Spider-Man films, and if it got 100 yeses, I would do it. We're well over 100, and I've been wanting to do this for a while, and most especially now, since we are in the midst of the re-releasing of all of the live-action movies. I thought now is the perfect time to strike while the iron is hot. Now I'm gonna have to get into a couple things before we get into this ranking, but first and foremost, if you're new here, I'm Cinephile ASMR. I upload everything ASMR and movie related, so if you have not subscribed already, please do so. And if you haven't, please follow me on both my Letterboxd and TikTok. My Letterboxd is where you will get the fastest logs and reviews for the movies I've seen before I translate it onto a video. And my TikTok, I upload twice a day. I occasionally go live. That's where you can get to know me a bit more and watch more of those individual smaller form videos. But above all, make sure that you are in a comfortable, nice, relaxed position to watch this very relaxing, extremely divisive, I'm assuming, video, because I'm going to be 100% keep it a buck with you. I do not think there is a list or a ranking I have made on or off the camera that has changed periodically, a little bit here and there over the years, more than this ranking. And that is why I have intentionally put off doing this video for so long, because I'm afraid that I'm going to second guess things. But seeing movies now theatrically on a big screen that I've never been able to is really reaffirming a lot for me. So again, these are my opinions. Comment below. Some of these are going to make sense, but the reasonings behind them are going to cause people to pick up their pitchforks and torches. But please, this is for relaxation and just to have fun. Comment your ranking. We're going to be doing all 10, including the Tom Holland films, the Garfield films, the Raimi films, and the 2 Spiderverse movies. I intentionally chose not to include the 2 Venom movies because they're only going to be in lists because they're canonically intertwined with the Holland movies. I just don't think they're on the same level or made with the same level of intent behind all the other Spider-Man movies. So it's just going to be the 10. Now, starting things off at the number 10 spot, not surprising, this movie has its defenders. I am not one of them. We have Far From Home. This was the movie that made me realize how vital of a character New York City is to Spider-Man, and it made me realize a lot about the worst things that signify and are indicative of the MCU. Homecoming, I have things to say. Far From Home made that put on a personified blast. This feels like a film that can never just be the individual Spider-Man story. The MCU will forever make Spider-Man someone that is tangibly associated to a larger team. And yet again, it picks up on one of my least favorite aspects of the Home trilogy, which is for a good majority. It feels like Peter Parker is fighting battles that were not caused or made because of him. Mysterio has beef not with Peter Parker, but with Tony Stark for one of the dumbest reasons imaginable, paired with a new location and setting. But the fact that modern MCU made superhero films have to be made behind green and blue screens in a studio backlot and not on location anymore. It's the way that everything has to be tightly under wraps and no spoilers. It feels so lifeless. I wanted to love it. I wanted to buy into it, but the Mysterio reveal, everything behind it being holograms, should have been really, really cool. Spidey and MJ getting to come together a bit more should have worked, but it all just came out to be a fizzling fart that I could not buy when I first saw it. I tried to love it, but again, it is so desperate to try and make Tony Stark that Uncle Ben figure. But I think when your movie is so preoccupied preoccupied with tying the loose ends of the movies that came before it, you lose that essence. It is very much a term that I will break into a bit later in this ranking, but it is the epitome of everything wrong with the MCU. At number 9, keeping up with the home trilogy, I have to put Spider-Man Homecoming, a significant improvement, but again, the battle is not Peter Parker's. This is, albeit a very good performance from Michael Keaton as the Vulture, but a fight rooted in something that Spider-Man had no involvement in. I appreciate the high school-esque story, the tie between being a teenager and fulfilling the life that you want versus being the Spider-Man to save New York. I love the small-scale stakes of the Vulture kind of just doing his own thing as like an arms dealer, doing these jobs left and right, and Spider-Man interfering. It's not like he is pursuing Spider-Man to kill him. I dig it. That reveal that he is Peter Parker's prom date's father is so gas. So gas. I just wish there was more for me to love. And that's sad. I think the identity and heart of this movie falls into the script that makes it so good. This was written by the duo who did Game Night, my favorite comedy of all time, and last year's Dungeons and Dragons, and I think that solely makes this movie so much better than it has any right being. With the MCU the way it is, the way that Tony Stark plays into the movie, I dug. I just don't think it was worthy of shelving what could have been Uncle Ben, which I can understand and admit is a bit of a tired trope considering that Garfield and Maguire's films had Uncle Ben's death, but maybe the grass isn't greener as an alternative when you realize that taking him out and replacing him with Tony Stark, and the only mention of him being in passing by Aunt May, who is very underwhelming in this. Her presence, Marissa Tomei, I love you. She doesn't work for me here. In Far From Home, she does the complete opposite of what Aunt May would do by packing Peter's suit, and I have issues with that. But in this, the fact that her significance is at its best out of the 3 films in Homecoming, but her presence feels so few and far between, is underwhelming. The web swinging is just so clunky. It does not have that dynamism and flow and vibrancy. It looks like mud. I couldn't get behind it. And Happy Hogan, I'm sick and tired of you, man. You gotta stop being in all these movies. And if you know me, this is no shock. Just get the trilogy done. At number 8, I am putting No Way Home. Again, an improvement to an extent. I am glad that these are villains and a story around the crux of Spider-Man's actions and decisions. Low-key, on paper, the idea of Peter Parker denying what Doctor Strange says about the fates of all of these people being villains no matter what, him looking at the face of this sorcerer and this bender and saying, no, I am not taking that, and choosing his own fate, and that being the thing that unravels. I loved it so much, but like I was saying the term earlier, this is conveyor belt food, man. It is meant to be had for you to feel really good, maybe not as good as other people when you eat it, but you digest it, you poop it out, and you just move on. There is not that level of vibrancy or depth in the locations, in the settings, in the character dynamics and interactions. I'll say I was championing this movie, screamed and got sick because of how much I was cheering when my favorites Garfield and Maguire came onto screen. There is some pretty damn effective moments that come with the interactions they have, but when it feels like so much of it is hitting those check boxes to make that line, that reference, that nostalgic hit the chord in you that you know you're gonna cheer, it's almost as if this movie is played out like a sitcom with a live audience. When the big cheer moment happens, there's like those 5 seconds of silence that feels so awkward on rewatch because they know the people are going to be cheering and they don't want you to not hear a line. It plays on the nostalgic heartstrings, and it made almost $2 billion, and it worked. It worked for what it was trying to do. But if I'm going to be honest, it this. Like, the drop off, I think I would say I would give it like a 4.5. When I first watched it, was on cloud 9. But when I rewatched it, I was like, man, where is the sauce? Where is this? I think that first 30 minutes is bad. I think it's really bad. The pacing, the writing, it just does not fit well. But the moment that highway fight between Ock and Peter happens, I'm like, okay, we're getting somewhere. But I will say, after Aunt May's death, which I wish I could feel something towards, but the latter two films prior to this did not build up the rapport between Peter and May to make me feel as invested. And then after that, I felt a bit more locked in. That apartment sequence has some really cool choreography and shots. It's lifeless. They're in the most sterile, very much personality stripped apartment and location ever, and it makes me appreciate the Garfield and Maguire films a lot more. I don't know, I want to love Tom Holland, and I think as an actor he is so good, but the fact alone, let me put this into perspective, I don't think that when people talk about Zendaya as a star, that her star power came from these Spider-Man movies, but in fact what she has done in Dune and Challengers, same thing with Tom Holland, he should be everywhere, but these movies do not challenge the actors to give them the nuance and the depth needed to have lasting effects like what the Raimi trilogy does, and to a different effect the Mark Webb movies, and that says a lot. It feels like they have so much at their disposal, but they don't do enough with it. I could go on and on and on, but this list is not meant to bash, because we are taking a significant jump from the number 8 spot to the number 7 spot, having just rewatched this movie in the theaters. The Amazing Spider-Man holds up very well in aspects. We keep talking a lot about how unfortunate Raimi was dealt with not being able to do Spider-Man 4, but the fact that Mark Webb, a man that at the time of making this movie had only made 500 Days of Summer, Marvel calls him up, seeing the success of that movie, and says, we want you to do this, as a reactionary thought to what executives assumed was what the metrics wanted. A young, hot, angsty, muscular Spider-Man who yells and shouts and is just frustrated at the world. Mark Webb took that on, and it's like this exoskeleton of what the screenplay for what Spider-Man 4 was going to be like, with Kurt Connors redone, retooled, and fixed to make it an origin story. And for the good majority, I think it does work. Don't really like the muted look of this movie. It doesn't look like the mud that the MCU films are, but it is just a bit too dark. The lighting and the interiors do not have that dynamic visual flow and aesthetic that I think TASM 2 does have. But man, oh man, either through the charisma and the chemistry between Stone and Garfield, Garfield is crazy in this movie. He has these mannerisms and tonalities that just are like, what are you doing, man? But you can't help but love. And I think beneath a lot of the interference, behind a lot of the checkboxes that were trying to be hit, this came out the same year as The Dark Knight Rises and The Avengers. It's like this movie was trying to be so different from what the Raimi films were, to hit the hot topic crowd, to make the angst feel like it's embedded to the character, but it doesn't lose its identity. I dig so much of this. There is a beautiful story, an aching tragedy about a boy who's reaching the pinnacle in his life where he needs a father who has been absent from his life for the better part of his life, and in doing so he seeks refuge in Connors by finding this answer to helping him get his arm back. And there's these glimmers of a story about just a man and a boy coming together. He sees Kurt Connors as this father figure, and because of that he wants a father figure, but he loses himself, and this eventual answer becomes what he turns into the lizard. I just think the dichotomy of a boy digging a hole, trying to find this figure as genius Connors plays into being a fatherly role, but that winds up having him become the Lizard, and so much pain and hurt comes of it, is brilliant. But we don't get enough of it, unfortunately, and that's what I think the movie signifies. So much potential, so much to be had. It lays the groundwork, but people feel sympathy for Sam Raimi for the interference from Spider-Man 3. Mark Webb had interference before he even got hired, and it carried over into TASM 2, which is at my number 6. Now, if we're talking about No Way Home to The Amazing Spider-Man in terms of improvement for me, this is my take. The Amazing Spider-Man to The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is like a 3.5 to a strong 4.5. I unapologetically love this mess of a film with so many cooks in the kitchen. You have Rhino, you have Green Goblin, you have Electro, you have a Sinister Six setup, you have like a Gwen and Peter story, a Spider-Man story with Aunt May, you have him with Harry, you have what all of that unfolds. The fact that they had Shailene Woodley as MJ and they cut that, but to think it was supposed to be in the movie, this is what people say Spider-Man 3 is, a mess, but I love it. I love this film so much, and we talk about an improvement from a filmmaker to the sequel. Holy hell, Mark Webb goes full maskless in this. He goes absolute crazy. It has the best web swinging. It might be the best looking Spider-Man film from an action perspective, and I think it is a film that I don't think it was intended to be this way, but whether through the action or the characters, it feels like a splash page of a comic book. Jamie Foxx's Electro is so goofy. Same thing with Dane DeHaan as Green Goblin, but they relish in it. The scenery, the way that their interactions happen, the fights, it hits so hard. The cinematography, the direction, the writing, even though it's not good at times, the way that Gwen and Peter interact, that relationship, the chemistry, it is just amplified and made so much better. The interference was not good, but I honestly think it ages better because of how much of a mess it is, but you have to commit to the absurdity of it all. It's like you're trying to make a cake, and this cake is not coming together well. And once it is done, you eat it for the first time, whether from the cooks to the people, the customers, and they hate it. They do not like it. There is qualities that are good, but then you remember that memory, how much of a dumpster fire it was. But when you look back on it, it was like if you're gonna go out with a bang. I love this movie. I cannot wait to see it again in theaters. Like, what big blockbuster film has the villain shooting electricity from their body and says, "It's time to blow out my candles"? Like, what? And in that same breath, the fact that by the end of this movie, I am in tears because Peter's trying to save Gwen and the web turns into a hand. Dude, movies have never been more back than with The Amazing Spider-Man 2. You know, I'm having an affinity for a bit of studio interference and messes of movies, because at number 5, Spider-Man 3, oh my god, I love this film, but there is a caveat to this. There is available 2 editions of this movie, the theatrical and the editor's cut. The theatrical is like a 4.5 for me. The editor's, although still messy, doesn't change too much, but reorders some things, changes the score, and adds one scene, is a certified heater. I tell everyone that I love this movie. It gets better with age and time, and even though Avi Arad made Venom be a character in this movie when it wasn't even intended to be that way, people hate on Topher Grace, but like, look, for the movie itself and what it's trying to do, the tone and style, Topher Grace rips. That church sequence where he prays to God to kill Peter Parker, and then the goo comes onto him and the symbiote turns him into Venom is like the craziest thing I've ever watched. And like, this movie commits. My 2 takes in this. It's the best direction and acting and characterization of that trio between MJ, Peter, and Harry. They're at top form in this movie. Sam Raimi kicks ass as as the director behind this. Visually speaking, the action, the moment-to-moment interactions, interiors, the lighting, Pope cinematography, Christopher Guest as the composer, it is top form. The interference makes this messy, but my biggest take, Sandman, out of all the villains in this movie from a performance and characterization standpoint, is the best. I put him above Doc Ock, Green Goblin. Thomas Hayden Church is unbelievable in this movie. It's so easy to disregard Flint Marko in this as this subdued, monotone delivery, but I think what differentiates him from Doc Ock and Green Goblin is both of them have moments before and after, whether he takes the physical serum that enhances his body as Norman Osborn, or the tentacles start overtaking his brain and lapses of judgment with Doc Ock. But with Flint Marko, he becomes Sandman, but he's still Flint Marko. He does not want it, and you feel that in every scene. This is a film palpably about anger, resentment, but by the end, forgiveness, and it works to an unbelievable degree. I sob. It has one of my favorite endings to a trilogy ever. The foresight Sam Raimi has, the fact this was made before MCU setups, post-credit sequences. This was supposed to be a third film to a fourth, but this ends with two people embracing each other, holding each other as it fades to black, and that is poetry. And number 4, the movie that jump-started my childhood imagination and wonderment for Peter Parker, Spider-Man. Like, I feel like above anything in all of these other movies, what else could possibly be said? A trailblazer is not cutting that movie enough justice. It holds up. I love Willem Dafoe. I love Tobey Maguire. People have memed on his facial reactions, but there is nobody that has ever done it like he does, where it's like his face is in half, where his eyes are doing something completely different from his lower half, and his lips quiver. His eyes are just saying 1,000 words. He's unbelievable. This movie started it for me. One of the more rewatchable films. I think I've seen this film like close to 200 times. It's a comfort film. I love it. Nothing else can really be said. Now I'm going to combine number 3 and number 2 just for the sake of posterity. And I feel a lot has been said, and you might disagree about the order here. But at number 3, I have Into the Spider-Verse. And at number 2, I have Across the Spider-Verse. Into the Spider-Verse, actually, believe it or not, when I first saw it, I loved it, but I didn't think it was that amazing. I was so dumb and naive. I think I was like 15 years old, and man, if young cinephile me could look at myself now, I would be amazed, because it is a stroke of genius. No film has had a greater influence on the state of the industry, on the state of animation, more than Into the Spider-Verse. It has spawned from the years since some of my favorite animated projects, Mutant Mayhem, Mitchell's vs. the Machines, all of these movies that take such creative risks, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, all thanks to that movie. It is the pinnacle of comic book storytelling brought to life in this extravaganza of color and storytelling. But the movie that I have seen the most times in the theater still to this day is Across the Spider-Verse, a film that takes everything masterfully done by the first and turns it up to 11. The stakes, the intimacy, the relationships, the energy and aura is at an all-time high. To this day, I saw 6 or 7 times in the theaters. No film is going to touch it, maybe Beyond the Spider-Verse, but this film does something so different, and people who say, oh, it doesn't feel like a complete story, I could not empathize with more, because I want to understand, but I can't. I physically can't when the story starts and ends with Gwen's face, Spider-Gwen, the journey she goes through with reconvening with her father, who just finds out that she is Spider-Man, or Spider-Gwen, sorry, but how could you not say to an extent that it is a complete, satisfactory to an extent story that leaves you wanting big screen, man. What an event. I can't wait for Beyond the Spider-Verse. It was a beautiful piece of storytelling, the voice acting, the performances, the way it pushed the envelope as a sequel, but as a story. I chewed up it every single time. I adore that film. I kiss the ground that I walk on because of it. And of course, at number 1, Spider-Man 2, a film that I saw on the big screen, and although I had a really bad theatrical experience like 2 weeks ago, it did not shape or obstruct the way I felt about this movie. I would not simply be here without the existence of Spider-Man 2. Literally, I don't think I would be alive. I owe that film, quite literally, everything. It has taught me the ins and outs of who I am as a creative, as a person. It is one of the most fun, loving, endearing, care-infused movies to ever exist. I owe that movie everything. And I say that Sandman and Sam Raimi's direction and the look of Spider-Man 3 is superior, but this is all around just like the greatest movie ever made, man. This movie operates on pure freaking jet fuel. I have nothing else I can add to that. I adore the movie so much. Again though, please, I need to know what your rankings would be. Give me, if you got to this point, some of your hottest takes when it comes to the Spider-Man films, the hills that you will die on, because I think when you have a character like Miles Morales or Peter Parker, but in the span of like 2 to 3 decades, we get so many different stories that elevate in quality, but also in ideas and themes. You know you have such a jackpot on your hands, and I love to engage in discourse. Let's be respectful though. Thank you for upvoting to do this video because I've wanted to. I hope you enjoyed. Comment below what other rankings that I haven't done you would be interested in seeing. I would love to hear your guys' feedback, but above all else, I want you to remember to take life